Woke Supremacy
this Sunday.
News.
Our top news. We begin this hour with heavy heart as the world prepares for the funeral and final goodbye to Queen Elizabeth II. U.S. President Biden, along with the First Lady, briefly visiting the Queen's coffin today, offering a silent reflection to the monarch he first met back in 1982. Biden then signing the official condolence book at Lancaster House and offering these words about the Queen's reign.
We've had an opportunity to meet with an awful lot of consequential people. But I can say that the ones who stand out in your mind are those whose relationship and interaction with you are consistent with their reputation. When the Queen had us to the castle for tea and we were joking crimpets, she kept offering me more. I kept eating everything she put in front of me. But she was the same in person as her image. Decent, honorable, and all about service. And our hearts go out to the royal family, to King Charles and all the family. It's a loss that leaves a giant hole. And sometimes you think you'll never overcome it. But as I've told the King, she's going to be with him every step of the way, every minute, every moment. And that's a reassuring notion. So to all the people of England, all the people of the United Kingdom, our hearts go out to you. And you were fortunate to have had her for 70 years. We all were. The world's better for her. Thank you.
Mr. President, why did she remind you of your mother?
Just because the way she touched when she leaned over, the way she had that look like, are you okay? Anything I can do for you? What do you need? And then also make sure you do what you're supposed to do.
What do you think she meant to the wider world beyond the UK, Mr. President?
Well, I think, look, the American press has heard me say for a long time, but I think the thing that is, maybe it's too much, if you excuse the expression, the Irish of it, but it's about treating people with dignity. I talk about how my mother and father thought that everyone, no matter who they were, no matter what their station, no matter where they're from, deserved to be treated with dignity. And that's exactly what she communicated. Just the way she walked by her staff, just the way she acted. And I think what she gave is a sense of, maybe above all, the notion of service. We all owe something. There's something within our capacity to do that can make things, not just the world better, but your neighborhood better, your household better, your workplace better. And that's what she communicated to me anyway. And it was an honor to meet her. An honor to meet her.
And right now, tens of thousands of mourners continue to pay their respects ahead of tomorrow's funeral. CNN's Caitlin Collins and Kate Williams are in London for the ceremonies. Caitlin, to you first. President Biden marking this solemn occasion. So what is next on his schedule?
Well, he just left Buckingham Palace. That's where King Charles hosted President Biden, First Lady Jill Biden, and other world leaders who are here for the Queen's funeral tomorrow for a reception. And it was a little bit more casual than it typically would be, something of that affair, where they were visiting, obviously, his first face-to-face meeting with King Charles since that conversation that he was talking about there, where he was consoling him about the loss of the Queen and saying, you know, just because she's gone doesn't mean she won't always be with you. And that comes after earlier he had been at the Lancaster House signing that condolence book where he was making those remarks, talking about not just what his experience with the Queen was like, but also what he believed she really meant for the world. And you saw the president signing that condolence book in the state dining room. The First Lady also signed a condolence book, a separate one, in the drawing room at Lancaster House. And we saw a little bit about the message that she left, about what she believed the Queen's impression on the world was. And Jill Biden said that she lived her life for the people. She served with wisdom and grace. She said we will never forget her warmth, kindness, and the conversations that we shared. Obviously, that comes after the Queen hosted President Biden and First Lady Biden for a private tea last year at Windsor Castle after the G7 summit. And so they did have their last private meeting with her at that time. and just talking about the impression that she left on him. And what President Biden had summed it up by basically saying she was someone who, when you met her, she lived up to the reputation that she has.
Yeah, some really poignant thoughts, and really nice to see his handwriting on that condolence book. So, Kate, the final preparations are underway for tomorrow's funeral ceremonies, even though we know now the plans have been in place for decades. So what should we expect?
Yes, Federica, tomorrow is going to be really such a great day in British history. We have never seen the like in London. We have had a state funeral before for the King's father in 1952, but not many people can remember that. They can remember the Queen's coronation, not so many of the King's funeral, and in 1965 for Winston Churchill, but that was different. This is our first royal state funeral for 70 years, and this is such a significant moment. It will be a great moment of pageantry and also this great meeting of world leaders. They've just been having this reception that Caitlin was talking about at Buckingham Palace. 200, probably 300 world leaders. We don't exactly know who's here. We will obviously see perhaps the condolence book online, and it's this huge global event which reflects the Queen's diplomatic efforts. 1 million miles, 120 countries she visited. She only stopped doing overseas visits in her 80s, and really she was the international queen, and she really had such an impact on the world stage. This is what her reign was, and this will be commemorated tomorrow in a great moment at Westminster Abbey. It dates back to the 11th century, and there where the Queen was crowned in 1953, where she was married in 1947, where she saw her children and grandchildren married, she will now be laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, and then later at St George's Chapel, Windsor, where her father, her mother, her sister and her husband are all buried. She will rejoin them.
And Caitlin, I mean, it is interesting to hear Biden's thoughts on, you know, paying homage to the Queen because of her service to country, her service to family. But then he was also asked a much more personal question about why he saw in the Queen his own mother. Tell us what his response was.
Yeah, he's not the first U.S. president, actually, to say that the Queen reminded him of his mother, or a grandmother figure, as Michelle Obama said. She believed after they had spent some time with the Queen. But he was asked, you know, what was it about her that made him think of his mother? And he said it was really her mannerisms, the way, you know, she touched him, or the way she made sure, had this look, he said, as to ask, are you okay? Do you have everything you need? He also said that she gave a look of, make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so just kind of shedding some light on that interaction that they had. You know, that's really what he's focused on since she passed, was what she was like in that private meeting, where they also talked about personal stories. She inquired about world politics, thoughts on the Chinese leader, Russia's leader, Putin, as well. And so just this conversation that they had. And that meeting itself was also remarkable in the sense of the aspect of grief here, because she was the first U.S. president that she had been around since Prince Philip had died. And she was also, you know, now he is meeting with King Charles at this reception, as he did just a few moments ago. He spoke with King Charles this week and was talking about consoling him about the loss of his mother and what that is like. And of course, President Biden himself is someone who has dealt with a lot of grief in his life and has talked about how those experiences have really shaped him as well. And so it's an interesting aspect to look at these relationships and these conversations.
That is so fascinating. And Kate, this condolence book, I mean, being signed by all the dignitaries who are coming to town to pay homage to her, what happens to that book?
Well, as a historian, I'm hoping we will be able to see it. They'll put it online. I hope that we'll be able to see all these messages, all these very meaningful, personal messages. Just as Caitlin was saying, you know, it's really personal what President Biden was talking about the Queen. And we last saw the Queen in service, working just 2 days before she passed, meeting the new Prime Minister Liz Truss. But I really think of one of her great moments before she passed. One of her final moments was when she was hosting the G7 in Cornwall with President Biden, and she had a cake there, and she was at the many of the beautiful sights of Cornwall. And that, I think, would be a really...
She had that sword at the cake.
Yeah, the sword.
She cut the
I think it's a really happy memory for her that she was able to go to Cornwall and really meet the world leaders. And meeting these world leaders, she's touched so many, and so many of them have met, who are here today, have met her repeated times. They have their own personal memories. So I would love, as a historian, to see that book, and I hope it is released to us.
Yeah, and that moment with the sword, I think a lot of people remember that, someone wanting to give her some assistance, and she's like, I know how to use this, putting everybody in place. That was fun. All right, Caitlin Collins, Kate Williams, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so pomp and pageantry have spanned the 10 days of mourning for the Queen, and it will all be elevated even more as Queen Elizabeth makes her final journey through the streets of London tomorrow. The Queen will continue to lie in state at Westminster Hall until 5:30 Eastern Time Monday morning. Her coffin will then travel with an escort from the Royal Army Navy to Westminster Abbey, the royal family following on footstep close behind. A funeral service will begin at 6 a.m. Eastern, attended by 2,000 people, including world leaders, public figures, royals, and dignitaries. And then after the service, the Queen's coffin will depart Westminster Abbey and travel around the Wellington Arch. The path will cut through London's government district, passing Downing Street to the Wellington Arch. The Queen will be driven 25 miles west of the capital to Windsor Castle. It is there the Queen lived the last 2 years of her life. And once in Windsor, the state hearse will drive along the picturesque avenue dubbed the Long Walk, where thousands of onlookers will bid a final farewell. The King and other royals will join the procession on foot. The King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery will fire minute guns from the East Lawn as the Queen travels to St. George's Chapel. A separate, more intimate service will take place there around 11 a.m. Eastern Time. The royal family and members of the royal household and personal staff will be in attendance. The Queen's coffin will then be committed to the royal vault below the chapel, where many royal family members have been laid to rest. A private burial will be held for the family Monday evening. The Queen will be buried in the King George VI Memorial Chapel alongside her late husband, Prince Philip, who she was married to for 73 years. So all of this will require massive security, of course. Here now is CNN Chief Law Enforcement and Intelligence Analyst John Miller, also CNN Royal Commentator Emily Nash. Good to see both of you. I mean, it is going to be quite a day tomorrow. Of course, it's been an extraordinary 10 days of mourning. But John, to you first, we're now just hours away from the start of these ceremonies. What is happening behind the scenes, perhaps, to make sure the Queen's final journey remains safe, really, for everyone?
Well, it's been happening for a long time, not just for tomorrow, which is the big day, but it's been happening throughout the other ceremonies, where you see there's a complex police plan that accounts for what you'd expect, which is crowds, traffic, and movement. But behind that, there's what we call the counterterrorism overlay. And that is things like having bomb squad units pre-positioned, ready to move in quickly in a place where you won't be able to do an evacuation or halt an event the way you would in a normal procedure of a suspicious package. That means having the air monitors that are looking for chemicals, radiation detectors, biological screening that's done every day. There's a lot you don't see that goes on in the background, including leads teams that every threat that's called in, every person that they say, this person may have a plan, they're going out to interview that caller, find that person, assess whether it's a threat or a poison pen. All of those wheels have been turning and will be turned up tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Emily, Americans may be very familiar with Westminster Abbey, the site of so many royal events in the past, but even as I read through all the details of the map, there are other sites that hold a lot of importance. Why, in particular, is the Wellington Arch so significant and important here?
Well, the Wellington Arch was the original entrance to Buckingham Palace when it was first built, and it later became a memorial when Wellington defeated Napoleon. So it's very important in terms of being a historical monument, but it's also really the moment where the Queen is going to leave London and leave the palace behind for the last time. This is where she will be transferred into the state hearse, and so it's very much about bringing that final journey through the streets of London that she was so familiar with to a close and moving on to the second part of the funeral day.
And I mean, it really is a great distance. On the map, it may not seem like it because we're talking about the center of London and all seems pretty truncated. But I mean, this is quite the course here, John, which means you've got tens of thousands of people expected to line the streets. As I mentioned, you got royal family members who'll be walking behind the coffin in some areas. Talk about the challenges now to us that all of this presents security-wise as to how detail pays attention to everyone on foot, everything and anything that is moving beyond the procession.
Well, from a security standpoint, from a counterterrorism standpoint, you have a multi-layered problem here. One, you have the royals, who of course are at the center of this, but also a potential target, also a security risk. In fact, the Metropolitan Police in London have a special unit that is dedicated to keeping track of people who have threatened royals, who are obsessed with royals, who have elaborate fantasies about them. And this is one of those days where they're going to have to figure out where are all of those people, who's with them, are they able to watch them, you know, are they in the crowd? So it comes with those complications. But the crowd itself, beyond the royals, who are going to have plenty of security, the crowd itself is a major vulnerability. And that is, you know, in a city where they've had crowds attacked with ramming attacks with vehicles, with knife point attacks, with explosive attacks. A crowd that stretches for miles, involving tens of thousands of people, makes its own self a target where you can create an incident there where you don't have to attack the church, you don't have to attack the royals, you don't have to attack a world leader. You're attacking the event, which is attacking the monarchy, the Queen, and the UK by attacking the crowd. And they have a full understanding of that. And this is where the Metropolitan Police really have to rise to the occasion. It's a department with very tough morale problems, but this is going to give them a chance to rise to what is the most complex security challenge that any Metropolitan Police Department has faced probably in recent history.
Wow. Well, it is terrible that you have to prepare for it, but of course you have to prepare for it. So, Emily, I want you to help me again dot the map of all these significant markers along the route. The Queen will travel to Windsor Castle. Help us explain the importance of Windsor Castle.
Well, Windsor Castle dates back for 1,000 years. It was originally built by the Normans, so this is the seat of the British monarchy. And I think it's hugely symbolic that she is going back there. This is somewhere, while Buckingham Palace is her official residence, that she regarded as home. She spent more time there, especially over the past decade, than she did at Buckingham Palace. She would go there from Thursday to Monday, most weeks while she was not at one of her other residences. And it's particularly poignant because it's where she spent lockdown with the Duke of Edinburgh, who passed away. And I think, as Kate was saying earlier, you know, she had always intended to be buried alongside her late husband. When her coffin disappears into the royal vault, she will be joining him there, but they will later be moved to the King George VI Memorial Chapel, which she commissioned for her parents and her sister Princess Margaret. So they are all going to be reunited. But more than that, this is a chapel, St George's Chapel, that contains the burial sites of 10 former British monarchs. So she's also taking her place in history.
That's so nice. All right. Well, Emily Nash, John Miller, really appreciate your insight on all of this. Thanks so much. It is going to be an extraordinary day, just as it has been over the past week and a half now, too. Thank you. We're also following breaking news out of Puerto Rico, where we're now is without power as Hurricane Fiona barrels toward it with wind gusts of 100 miles an hour. Fiona strengthened into a Category 1 storm earlier this afternoon. Forecasters say there is the potential for life-threatening flash flooding, mudslides, and landslides. CNN's Leila Santiago is joining us live from Puerto Rico. So, Leila, pretty miserable conditions there. What's happening?
The wind pick up, the rain pick up. But just in the last 10-15 minutes, a bit of breaking news confirming that there is now an island-wide power outage. The governor confirming this. So the big question now will be, can this now private company that handles the utilities here in Puerto Rico get power up and running again quickly for the folks on the island? As you mentioned, we are also keeping an eye out for flash flooding as well as mudslides. But I got to tell you, timing here is interesting, because we were almost 5 years to the date that Hurricane Maria struck this island. And so what I'm hearing from people that I've talked to today is pure anxiety and trauma. We went down to Caguas, Puerto Rico. That is about 30-45 minutes south of San Juan, where the majority of the customers that didn't have power this morning were in that area. We talked to a family who lost power at 8 o'clock this morning. I want you to hear from Lourdes, who had to leave her home to stay with her son because it's safer there. I will warn you, it's a little bit dark and hard to see because there's not power, but she speaks to what she is feeling now that the power has gone out. Listen. She says when the power goes out, she gets real anxious and she gets really tense, worried. She's staying here because she left her house. It's safer here, and she's worried what she's going to find at her house. And while we were there, a wind gust came in, and that anxiety was just palpable. After Hurricane Maria, they were a year without power. So again, yes, there was a lot of concern about mudslides. There was a lot of concern about flash flooding. There's a river nearby that family. They are monitoring that closely as the rain and the wind picks up and Fiona gets ready to sort of get near the southern part of the island where Hurricane Maria came in and where we also saw powerful earthquakes in 2020. So this is an island that understands this is a Category 1 hurricane right now, but they're not taking any chances because a lot of trauma still lingers from the natural disaster that has struck here before. Frederica?
Right. You said, Layla, just 5 years ago, roughly September 16, 2017. It's almost like it was yesterday. It's such a vivid memory, I know, for the people there especially. Layla Santiago, thank you so much. Let's bring in CNN's Chad Myers, who is tracking the storm. So, Chad, oh my gosh, what is Fiona doing right now, and what is its potential?
You know, it really has been an overachiever. The water has been so very warm down there, nothing really wearing it out. There hasn't been a different tropical storm to kind of cool the water off. So this is now an 85-mile-per-hour sustained with wind gusts well over that. In fact, they even had a measured wind gust of 103. Catastrophic flooding expected. Those are the top line words what the Hurricane Center just put out at 2 o'clock. Catastrophic flooding expected. So we are going to see between 15 and 20 inches. I've just measured some of it on radar. I'm already seeing some spots with 10 on the ground already. Here's Ponce, right here, the big town down to the south. This is the area that is seeing the eye wall. So we're not calling landfall because the center of the eye has to make landfall for that to happen. But already a transmission line from the power plant has gone away. 100% of the island is in the dark. Ponce, there you go, 103-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and the heavy rainfall making flash flooding, but certainly also, Fred, making mudslides. This is a very topographical area. This is up and down. From El Yunque all the way over to Ponce, you have a lot of up and down mountains, valleys, very, very just deep and almost small valleys like you'd see in maybe like West Virginia in some spots. This is the area that's going to pick up that 10 to 15 inch rainfall, some storm surge, but maybe only about 3 feet. And then it turns into a major hurricane. Category 3. There's Bermuda right there. Maybe a near miss, but close enough to watch it. You're in the cone, Bermuda, for sure. Luckily turning away from the mainland U.S.
Well, let's hope it continues to take that right turn and just dissipate, not even hitting Bermuda or anywhere else.
That's right.
All right. Chad Myers, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So a massive typhoon is bearing down on southern Japan, bringing torrential rain and strong winds. This typhoon made landfall earlier today. More than 2 million people have been ordered to evacuate the island of Kyushu because of possible landslides and flooding. Announced arrivals. Several migrants from Venezuela were unexpectedly dropped off as far west as Sacramento. And today, the Massachusetts governor activating the state's National Guard to help after 50 migrants were flown to Martha's Vineyard. CNN's Gloria Pazmino joining me live from New York. Gloria, what can you tell us about people who are coming in, being relocated to different parts of the states?
That's right, Fred. Here in New York, the Department of Homeland Services has processed 11,000 migrants in the last couple of months. And as you said, people have been getting dropped off in Martha's Vineyard, in parts of New York. Here in Manhattan at the Port Authority bus terminal, a total of 6 buses arrived this morning. That's in addition to 6 other buses arriving yesterday. So this is now becoming a continuous drop-off of people that the city is having to receive and connect with resources. You ask about the condition that they're arriving in. We've gotten reports of people that are arriving dehydrated. They haven't had access to proper food while they make the several days trip here to New York. And the mayor has been speaking about this as well. He has been critical of these Republican governors who are not coordinating with the city of New York or any other of these jurisdictions where people are being dropped off. He is saying that is making helping people and being able to connect them with resources really difficult. He was on CNN earlier today describing the condition that people have been arriving in.
We should be clear that this is, as it stated, a humanitarian crisis created by human hands. And it is an all hands on deck moment where we're all supposed to come together and coordinate. It's really unfortunate when you watch government misrepresent where you're sending people. In some cases, we had those who were COVID positive on the buses. We had individuals who were dehydrated, didn't have proper food. Some were even tagged like you would tag an animal.
So Mayor Adams speaking there about the lack of coordination. Obviously, the city having to now set up people with resources. Similar challenges are being felt in other states, people needing shelter to be connected to legal services. And as these drop-offs by these Republican governors show no sign of stopping anytime soon. As I said, 6 more buses arrived at Port Authority this morning. Fred.
And then, Gloria, do we know any more about what the mayor says some people were tagged? In what way?
Yeah, so we've actually have seen the reports and have seen video of migrants who have arrived with wristbands on their arms. Basically, they have been given a barcode, and this is just one of the things that has really outraged people here in New York, public officials, and many of the volunteers that have been trying to help people that have been arriving. That's what the mayor was talking about, describing it as a way that you would tag an animal. People are wearing wristbands with their numbers on them. That obviously evokes really bad memories and really negative images about the way that people are being treated.
Gloria Pazmino, thank you so much. All right, President Volodymyr Zelensky is found in Ukraine. President Zelensky says that more than 10 torture rooms have been found in several liberated areas of the Kharkiv region. Zelensky said Russian troops dropped the torture devices as they fled during Ukraine's counteroffensive. And it follows the grim discovery of a mass burial site in the eastern city of Izium. Ukrainian authorities say they found at least 440 graves and that some of the bodies show signs of torture. CNN's Nick Payton-Walsh joining us now. And so, Nick, what more are you learning about these torture chambers? I know you showed us these horrible grave sites, but what more is being learned about these torture chambers?
Yeah, Frederica, this forms part of the increasingly horrifying body of accusations and evidence that Ukrainian officials are finding as they move into areas that were occupied by the Russian forces for months. In this instance, these 10 torture chambers appear mostly to be in former detention centres, filtration centres used by Russian forces when they held an area, often it seems looking for pro-Ukrainian sympathisers, former Ukrainian military members, sort of making sure that there were no potential threats, it seems, in the area that they control. The devices appear, according to Ukrainian officials, to include things like electric shocks, and there have been some grisly images of the kind of prison cages that people were held in as well. So appalling conditions, appalling treatment, certainly. The Russian government's made no comment on this, but I should say they have a long history in Chechnya and other places where they've been deployed of using such kind of tactics. And you referenced that mass burial site in Izium. Today it said it's going to take them 2 weeks to exhume all the bodies there, and it seems that as they slowly do so, they find increased evidence of the mistreatment of people and the possible signs of torture, according to Ukrainian officials. Frederica?
And Nick, what's the latest with Ukraine's counteroffensive?
Yeah, I mean, there appears to be continued progress, slight, hard to be totally sure of. On the eastern side of the Oskil River, complex but important, that's essentially now, it seems, increasingly in Ukrainian hands. They've certainly crossed over to the eastern side of it. It's important because it means they can push to the south and come at the Russians from the north in a particular direction they may not have been expecting. There's other progress, it seems, possibly small, near where I'm standing in Kramatorsk, and continued tense situations in the south, according to Ukrainian officials. So no massive...
You can see it's impossible to forget her love for racehorses and her cherished corgis. And the Duke and Duchess of York, Andrew and Sarah, will now care for the dogs at the Royal Lodge on the Windsor estate. The Duchess and the Queen bonded over a shared love of dog walking and horse riding, even after Sarah's divorce from Andrew in 1996. As CNN's Randy Kay reports, the Queen's passion for the breed date back to her childhood.
Queen Elizabeth II's love of corgis may be traced back to her family dog named Dookie. That's her as a young princess with Dookie. Later, for her 18th birthday, she was given a corgi of her own named Susan.
Susan was so close to the Queen that she actually went on her honeymoon with her. A year after the Queen had Prince Charles, Susan had her first 2 offspring. Those were Sugar and Honey.
And so it began. Michael Gross is writing a book about the Queen and her corgis and says she loved Susan so much that she bred 14 generations of corgis from her, about 25 litters, as many as 100 puppies. Among her corgis there was Whiskey, Pickles, Ranger, Mint, Legend, and Dash, just to name a few. The Queen adored them, often feeding them and walking them on her own. They were her constant companions.
And where did you come? I know what you want.
It turns out the Queen's corgis served a multitude of purposes. They were good PR, showing the softer side of the monarch and stealing the spotlight in this James Bond spoof. And even though they seemed to waddle a bit, the pups were somewhat of a security team.
There was one visitor to Balmoral who noticed that anytime anyone came near the room where the Queen happened to be, a whole pack of corgis would just break out barking and scampering around.
During awkward moments, the corgis were a conversation starter.
The corgis always made conversation go more easily.
And apparently their opinion mattered too. After Prince Harry introduced Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, to the Queen for the first time, the Daily Telegraph noted he'd said the corgis took to Meghan straight away. When times got tough, the Queen took comfort in her corgis. Like in 1992, when then Prince Charles' marriage to Princess Diana was falling apart and the Windsor Castle caught fire.
Almost immediately, she called in breeders to pick a stud dog to put with one of her favorite female dogs, because what would cheer her up better than new puppies?
She loved her corgis so much she bred one of them with her sister Princess Margaret's dachshund, creating what's known now as a Dorgie.
The Dorgie creation was 100% hers, and this is the most radical innovation she made as a breeder.
Well, it must be 3 or 4 years when she came down into Windsor.
The Queen also loved horses. This is a picture of Elizabeth as a young princess riding her first pony, Peggy. The pony was a gift for her 4th birthday from her grandfather, George V. Later, as Queen, she rode regularly. Here she is riding with former President Ronald Reagan. Over the last 30 years, the Queen reportedly earned millions of dollars racing horses she helped handpick. But it may not have been about the money as much as